I hope the sound's okay. I'm not going to go in the bathroom. I just figured I'd sit out here and see how it works. This is going to be pretty brief. This is an addendum to my best libertarian films, or good libertarian films. I think I named it good libertarian films because I didn't want to sound conceited and say I know the best, because I don't think I do. I'd have to know a whole lot more about film than I do. But I put an annotation there a couple of days after I loaded that because I forgot an amazingly good film from a libertarian perspective. But I think the vast majority of my subscribers would have already watched the video, and so will have missed it. The film is called By Lenin. It's a German film that came out in 2003, and it was starring a very good-looking actor named Daniel Bruhl. He's probably best known in the States for being in Inglourious Bastards. He played the German sniper who was killed by French. He has the hots for the French movie owner, and he kills her at the end after she kills him. Well, I guess he kills her first after she's gone. Anyway, the basic plot is it's set at the end of the DDR, the Deutsche Demokratische Republik, the East Germany, as it's commonly called in the West. Although there are flashback scenes to earlier, maybe a decade earlier in the late 70s. And it's about the story about a family, a single mother who's has two children, and her husband, 10 years before, fled to the West. They haven't seen or heard from him, supposedly, ever since. And they're pretty apolitical. The mother is actually very much into the East Germany. She believes in socialism. She's very active in all the social programs. Her children, as far as I can tell, are basically apolitical. They don't really feel that strongly one way or the other. At one point, her son, though, does join a demonstration, and he gets arrested, not in a serious way. He doesn't get charged with any crimes. And she witnesses this and has a heart attack. Now, she goes into a coma. He gets released. He's not in serious trouble. And basically, while she's in a coma, East Germany falls. The Berlin Wall comes down. The East German government, this is a little bit of history, it actually continued to exist for at least another year after that. But with the border gone, just people ignored it. And, it's literally a case of a state dissolving, in real time in front of everybody. Several months into this process, she wakes up from her coma, completely unexpectedly. And the doctors tell her son and her daughter, and her son is the one who's the most interested in protecting. The daughter seems, she loves her mother, but the son is much more protective and interested in keeping her well. He tells her that there can't be any shocks to her. She's gone through all this stress there. She's at great risk of another heart attack. And so, don't let anything upsetting happen to her. Now, he doesn't go any further than that, but her son, in an unrealistic but played out, it's portrayed realistically, but who would ever actually do this, decides to convince his mother to hide the fact that East Germany is dissolving and gone from her. She is basically bedridden, at least initially, and so they'd already refurnished the house. They had gotten new furniture because they redid everything. They dressed in their own clothes. He would hire people to come and pretend like it was the old days, and it's a good film. Like the creators of it, I think, are anti-capitalist, and they were attempting to make a critique of capitalism. There's little vignettes and montages in there that are kind of subtle critiques of capitalism that I've heard from Germans before. When I took German in college, there are several times where we read articles and stuff that had very subtle critiques, like it's not very nice, it's not as community oriented, it's not as family oriented, it's not as traditional. These sort of non sequiturs mostly that, there's an admission that, okay, it provides material goods, but, it's not as satisfying in a wholesome, deep down way as whatever was in East Germany before. I think the movie actually attempts to do that, but the stark reality is there is a direct comparison between the standards of living between the two, and any attempt to make a comparison reveals that there isn't one, that they don't compare, that the life that they had in the DDR was incomprehensibly poorer than that held in East Germany, or even held in East Germany after the fall. This comes out in so many little ways that are in the plot to kind of make good jokes about how they're trying to fool their mother, but it's right there in the face. For one thing, he goes to this, his mother likes pickles, and of course in East Germany they had a certain type of pickle that probably came from Poland or Hungary or some other place, maybe East Germany, maybe the Soviet Union, they don't say where. And he goes to the store and they're not there any longer because they are inferior to the pickles that are now available on the market. Nobody would purchase the DDR pickles when the world supply of pickles is available, and so he can't even buy the old kind. Now he goes to the store and it's now completely full of more goods than it ever had before. They kind of make light of this, like, oh, I went from a quaint store to like a consumer's paradise. Well, what's wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with a quaint store, but there's nothing wrong with a consumer's paradise either. And to give it away, he ends up finding old pickle jars in the garbage and putting the new pickles in them. He can't get the new pickles, and letting her eat those and, have her be none the wiser. There's also a little part about a Trabat. Of course, as soon as the wall came down, there was immediately no demand for Trabats any longer because, West Germany produces all manner of high-quality, wonderful cars. There's Mercedes and BMW, but there's also just Volkswagen. And Trabats don't hold a candle. They have no value other than kind of nostalgia value. There's someone in the United States who collects them just because he thinks it's cool, but otherwise you can't sell them. And it was interesting because they buy one after the wall falls down because their mother always wanted one. And she kind of remarks, what? It's only been 3 years that we've been on the waiting list. I can't believe how fast we got it. So to her, thinking in the DDR, the fact that they even have a Trabat is a mark of wealth. But in reality, it's something that they basically, it's for free. It's junk. The vast majority of people will never even buy. And that's that quick of a transition. And the movie just goes on and on and on. It's very clever. It's usually considered a dark comedy. There's stuff about finance in there because the East German mark was completely worthless at this point, and the West Germans, there's a strong desire in West Germany to reunite with East Germany, and they kind of had a thing where they said, we'll exchange your marks with the D-marks, the Deutsch marks, which have since been replaced by the euro. That's a whole other story. And there's a whole, and of course they slowly devalued it. I don't think it was ever 1-to-1, but at some point they said, we'll give you, for every 2 East German marks, we'll give you 1 Deutsch mark. And then it was, okay, well, now you got to give us 5. And then there was a cutoff date where you wouldn't get anything. And I won't give away what happens, but that's in there. They show him getting jobs. There's lots of funny stuff going on. They show him, he gets a girlfriend, and they become a squatter in an abandoned apartment. But, just before the wall came down, in other Eastern Bloc countries, I think specifically in Hungary and Czechoslovakia, people in East Germany were allowed to go to them, but they weren't allowed to go to the West, except under heavy, heavy restrictions. And at some point, those countries said, well, we'll let people freely travel to Austria, which is de facto saying we'll let East Germans leave our country. And many, many East Germans fled that way, and they would just leave. And they'd have these apartments. It's kind of cool. They open the door, and there's a whole stack of mail under the mail slot. They probably left a year before, a couple months before, or whatever. And the other thing that's interesting is many of the kind of ancillary characters on the side and the monologues that they give, and the monologue at the end makes this explicit, is there's a lot of nostalgia for the JDR, the DDR, the East Germany. There's a lot of people in East Germany who kind of harken back to those days, which is real normal. It's very normal for people to have nostalgia for their past. Most people tend to idealize their childhood to some extent. It's not always true. Some people think, hey, I grew up in a bad place and I'm glad but a lot of people think, oh, my hometown, the 1980s or the 1990s or the 1950s, those were the days. And that happens there too. But I'm reminded of a news broadcast I saw several years ago. I used to subscribe to a German language news report, kind of like RT, but it was in German. I didn't get much out of it because my German is not good enough to really garner much benefit from watching it. But they had a report about, it was the anniversary of the DDR, and they had these people coming out like having a display about how great it was. And as they depicted it, the DDR was this great place. It was a democracy, and they showed some passerbys on the street like, what are you talking about? It was a police state. It was one of the worst places to live in history. I had 1/10 of the population were informers for the government. They had a secret police, and I mean, they were pathetically poor. The stuff that they created was junk, even though before that, in pre-Iron Curtain, East Germany was very productive, although West Germany's always been the industrial heart of the country. I mean, and Prussia has always sucked, at least from a libertarian point of view. But, this lady in Berlin, just in real life, was saying, this is just pure make-believe. You're imagining some utopia or some idealized past that never existed. And at the end of By Lenin, he kind of has a monologue and says, the world that we created around our mother wasn't the real DDR. The real DDR was the one that arrested me, that threw me in prison. He doesn't say that, but it's kind of implied. We were, they didn't want to jolt her, and so they didn't give her any bad news related to the DDR. They just kind of presented the most sanitized, beneficent view of their society that they could. I don't want to give too much away, but it's one of those things where nobody can realistically look at this and not conclude that one of them seriously is on to something and one of them is seriously on the wrong path. The great YouTube user Anton Beatty, who is an anarcho-capitalist but almost never makes videos about that, and I don't know why. He interviews people like Noam Chomsky and Howard Zinn and Norman Finkelstein, and he used to be a socialist. He used to be a black Muslim. He used to attend Muslim Mosque #1 in Detroit, and he really comes across as an anarcho-syndicalist, but he is explicitly a Rothbardian. And I remember at one point years ago him saying in the comments something to the effect of, yes, it's true we don't have any purely free markets. It's also true we don't have any purely socialist systems to look at either. There's no socialist, whenever you bring up the Soviet Union or China or whatever, they always say, well, that's not exactly what I'm talking about. And then he asks, what exactly were you talking about? It hasn't existed either. But what we can do is have there be a scale and see, well, as countries move on that scale, how, are they getting warm or are they getting cold? And the two most classic, and it's very hard to compare societies. It's really very, very hard. There isn't actually, I think, a solid methodology that's scientific that can do that. I think you have to have a sound theory first, but because you can compare the United States and the USSR and be like, there's so many differences between the two that it's very hard to attribute the wealth of the United States to capitalism and the abject poverty of the Soviet Union to communism, because the Soviet Union, when it wasn't the Soviet Union, was objectively impoverished. And the United States is almost always, except for a few tiny examples, had way down on the scale of free markets compared to other societies. But you've got North and South Korea and East and West Germany. These are relatively homogenous societies. They are societies that are similar in most regards. They are societies that were politically unified prior to diverging economically in such an extreme way. And like I said, when you compare them, the results, there isn't a comparison. Which is not to say South Korea and West Germany are perfect. West Germany is not perfect by a long shot, and it's even less perfect now that it absorbed a much worse area. All the libertarians I know from Germany, and I know some, maybe half a dozen, they're all from the West, and all of them have a view that they would be better off if East Germany was not there. It would, it's like the California, New York, Massachusetts. It's where all the liberal communists are. But there isn't a comparison. The relative wealth between the two is so many orders of magnitude different that the only way you can consider them equivalent is to be completely delusional. So it's a very entertaining movie. It's a moving movie. I mean, you get into it. It's not a super drama, and it's just got. It's so weird because every little vignette, basically, in the movie is the juxtaposition between the material well-being of the two societies. And I don't think that was the intent. I think it was necessary for the story they wanted to tell and the plot they were trying to outline to do that. And I think that deep down they are against that. Daniel Bruhl, the first movie I ever saw him in, was one, I think it's called The Educators, or maybe it was a German film, and he was an anarcho-syndicalist in that. It was about a whole bunch of leftists, specifically left anarchists, who were crusading against capitalism. That's the first movie I ever saw him in. I don't know if he controls who makes these movies, but it doesn't explicitly say it, but the difference between the two is obvious. And I think you can watch it on YouTube. I watched it on YouTube a couple years ago. Since then, I've seen it on TV. Even just it's popped into my mind because it was actually on Showtime or Cinemax a few weeks ago, just before I came back to work. If you can find it on YouTube, I'd recommend watching it. I'd even consider if you can go to a place that rents movies, you might be able to find it in the foreign film section if you go to a big movie rental place, although in my experience there's not very many places like that. And I would even consider purchasing it. I think I probably will too in the near future. So it's a great movie. It's not and what also is great from a libertarian perspective, I think it's something that's actually attempting to critique capitalism, but you end up it's much better. And there's other things where he imagines his long-lost father, and he kind of imagined him as growing up after he ran away from the family. He imagined him as the quintessential fat cat. Like they have a part where he shows his mind's eye what he thought, and it was a huge fat guy eating hamburgers, Big Macs. And we found out later that that's not true at all. That, contrary to myth, this boogeyman of capitalism is totally false. And it's not idealized. It's not like his father is Jesus or anything, but just the demons that are imagined are not backed up by fact. And you hear this so often with anarcho-syndicalists and other socialists. That, capitalism is bad this, and capitalism is bad that, and capitalism kills, and blah, blah, blah. Totally divorced from reality. It's completely... They may as well be talking about unicorns and dragons, and Lord of the Rings is more realistic than the stuff socialists say in their condemnation of capitalism. So, definitely a good movie. Check it out if you can. I didn't look before I looked here, but By Lenin. It is in German, but you're a smart audience. You can read subtitles, and definitely a good movie. So, that's it.